Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey, and there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 489. This is your host, Holly Wharton, and I'm back with another exciting guest. Today, I am talking with Doug Noll. Doug was born with multiple disabilities. He had both audio and visual disabilities, as well as 2 club feet. After struggling with sports in school, he turned to scouts and the outdoors and started to thrive. Doug is a whitewater guide, a level 3 PSIA ski instructor, a sailor, and a fly fisher. He's also been a rock climber, mountaineer, competitive swimmer, and class 4 kayaker. His various outdoor adventures have taught him discipline, persistence, patience, mental endurance, fortitude, which he applies in his career as a peacemaker and mediator. In this episode, we discuss Doug's adventures, how he overcame his disabilities to thrive in the outdoors, and what he's learned over the years. So I've already told you a little bit about Doug, but here is his official bio. Douglas E. Noll, J.D., M.A., left a successful career as a trial lawyer to become a peacemaker. His calling is to serve humanity, and he executes his calling at many levels. He's an award-winning author, teacher, trainer, and highly experienced mediator. Doug's work carries him from international work to helping people resolve deep interpersonal and ideological conflicts to training life inmates to be peacemakers and mediators in maximum security prisons. His 4th book, De-Escalate: How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less, was published by Beyond Word Publishing in September of 2017. De-Escalate is now in 4 languages and in its 2nd printing. He is a co-founder of Prison of Peace and creator of the Noll Effect labeling system. In 2012, Doug was honored by California Lawyer Magazine as California Attorney of the Year. So we do talk a little bit about peacemaking and mediating in this episode, but we mostly talk about Doug's challenges and adventures and what he's learned from them. So what we learned. We discuss how Doug overcame his disabilities to thrive in the outdoors. We discuss meaningful moments in Doug's adventures and what he's learned from them. And finally, how Doug's adventures have informed his career as a mediator and peacemaker. So I hope you find this episode interesting and useful. Doug has such a variety of adventures that he's done over the years, and the different things that he practices has changed over the years. So it's really interesting to talk to someone who's been really active in so many different things. So here is this week's episode. Hi, Doug. How are you doing today?
Good, Holly. How are you?
Good. I look forward to a conversation.
Great.
So why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, professionally, I'm a lawyer turned peacemaker.
Mm-hmm.
I was a civil trial lawyer for 22 years, went back to school, earned my master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies, left the practice of law, and became a mediator and a peacemaker. Today, I help people solve very difficult problems. I'm just starting a really interesting project called my Difficult Conversations Project, where I'm inviting people who have to have a difficult conversation to come on to Zoom with me, and we're going to live stream to YouTube. I'm going to help them have the difficult conversation.
Oh, I like that.
I've done a couple beta tests, and it's been fabulous. The drama is really intense, right? But I'm really good at what I do.
Yeah.
They're able to have this difficult conversation and clear the air between them. So if anybody's listening and has a difficult conversation they want me to facilitate, they can go to dougnoll.com/LP difficult-conversations and book a call with me.
All right. That sounds interesting. I have a friend who's also a lawyer turned mediator. I think she's found that career change to be very satisfying. So it's good to talk to someone else who's doing something similar.
That's right. But this is even more interesting because I want to do it live, raw, and people have these difficult conversations they want to have, and everybody avoids their difficult conversations because you're involved. And I'm really good at creating a safe environment. So I'm really looking forward to this project. It'll be a lot of fun. In addition, I do a whole bunch of other stuff too, right?
Yes, you do. Tell us about your other stuff.
I live 60 miles south of the South Gate to Yosemite National Park, and I'm about 50 miles west of the north entrance to Kings Canyon, Sequoia. I live in the real California. It is the adventure land of the world here. Within an hour of, I have 10 acres, about 40 miles northeast of Fresno, right at the base of the mountains. And within an hour of where I live is world-class rock climbing, fantastic alpine skiing, amazing cross-country skiing, class 3 whitewater river, fly fishing. I mean, you name it. Hiking, of course.
Trail running. That's what I'm thinking.
World-class sailing, lake sailing, and just getting up in the mountains and goofing off. I mean, it's amazing, which is why I live here, because the place is so incredible. And then on the other side of the mountains, so 3 weeks ago, my wife and I drove over to June Lake, California, which is just north of Mammoth Mountain. I taught skiing at June Lake 50 years ago, and I hadn't been back. So to do that drive, you have to drive through the park, through Yosemite. But you don't go through the Yosemite that most people think of, the valley. You go into the valley a little bit and come around, and then you got to go all the way around up over Tioga Pass. You go through a place called Tuolumne Meadows, which is at 10,000 feet on the upper reaches of the Tuolumne River. You go up the pass. Tioga Pass is sitting at about 11,000 feet, 10,900. And then you drop down the steep canyon on the other side, 20 miles, make a left turn, and then you take the June Lake Loop into June Lake, which is on the eastern slope of the Sierra Nevada, an incredibly beautiful glacial valley with these 3 or 4 lakes and a little town nestled in there in this ski area. And so we spent a couple of days over there, and it reminded me how beautiful it was.
And did you grow up in this part of California, or did you move there?
I grew up in Southern California. I was very fortunate that my parent, even though I had a lot of disabilities, my parents got me into myself and my brothers into the Boy Scouts. And we were in a Boy Scout troop. They were very active in backpacking and mountaineering. And so we were out every weekend. Well, once a month, we were backpacking. And in the summer, we would do extended backpacks. This is long before there were wilderness areas the John Muir Trail existed, but the Pacific Coast Trail, nobody had even thought of that idea. I haven't never walked the John Muir Trail in its entirety in one trip, but I've walked every piece of it in various trips. And my youngest brother now, he's 60, and it's his goal to do the whole Pacific Coast Trail, but he's doing it in sections. He still lives in Southern California. So we live in what I call the real California. Most people think of Hollywood or LA. We were down in LA this last weekend, and I just shook my head. I said, I don't know how people live down here. The traffic being what it is, and the freeways being horrible and scary. And
yeah,
I don't commute. My commute's 10 feet to my office. And if I have to leave our property, it's 1.5 miles down a dirt road, then it's another mile on a 1-lane road, and then it's 20 miles on a 2-lane road before I hit my first freeway.
Wow, that's nice. I lived in LA back in the late 90s, and it was too much for me. Too much.
It's really a blessed place to live.
Yeah, sounds like paradise. So how did you get into outdoor adventures? Was that through scouting?
Actually, even before that, my dad took my brother and I on our first outdoor fishing trip when we were 5 and 6 years old. And we left LA and went up to Bishop, California, which is across the mountains from where I live now. And we went when he taught us how to fish.
Nice.
And then he taught us how to fly fish when we were a little older. And then we got into scouts. And that's when we really started to learn. And that's how I learned how to backpack and camp and do all that. And that's how I really got started. And then as I got older and got more exposure, I went to Dartmouth College because of outdoor stuff. That's where you go. And
really?
That's where I started rock climbing, and that's where I started teaching skiing. Started skiing when I was 8 years old. Started teaching skiing at Dartmouth and rock climbing, and got me into my first taste of whitewater in New Hampshire. And then just continually built the skill levels up and more adventures, and did a lot of whitewater in law school. Didn't ski much in law school, but I did a lot of whitewater because I was going to law school in Sacramento, and we had a bunch of rivers in the area, South Fork of the American, the Stanislaus, before it got dammed up. And we go up to Northern California and run the Klamath and the Rogue in Southern Oregon. And so got a lot of whitewater experience and skiing and rock climbing and you name it. It was just great. And I was hung with a bunch of guys and friends that were all like me. We were kind of adventurous outdoors people and got into mountaineering and,
all kinds of things. Yeah.
We'd ski on the water in the wintertime, and then we'd boat on it in the spring and the fall and catch fish out of the water in the summertime. And those were really fun days.
Yeah.
I'm a little older now. So you get a little older and I was kind of an adrenaline junkie. Not like some of my friends were really crazy. I mean, they were nuts. I was never really an adrenaline junkie. I just loved being outside and doing the adventure and doing some of the fun things that we did. I just turned 72 and I'm still skiing. I get in 30 or 40 days of skiing every winter, and I don't climb anymore, but we do a lot of sailing and walk in the mountains. And when we don't have a drought, I still raft and we still go up and do day trips on the Upper Kings. And when we're lucky enough to get a permit up in Idaho, we'll go run the Middle Fork at the Main. Get permits for those rivers.
So how has your participation in outdoor adventures changed over your life? Because it sounds like you've been practicing a lot of different types of adventures throughout your life, from the time you were a kid until now.
I was born with a lot of disabilities.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
I was born partially blind, partially deaf, two club feet, couldn't walk until I was 3 years old. I mean, I had a lot of problems, and that led to a lot of emotional problems. So, I mean, my parents were as loving as they could be, but they just didn't know how to deal with somebody like me, and they couldn't give me the emotional support I needed. And most of the coaches that I ran across did not have the patience to deal with a left-handed crippled boy. Even if you look at my left leg today, it's atrophied compared to my right leg, and I have limited flexibility in my left ankle. And I've learned how to overcome it. But in those days, it was both physically painful and emotionally painful. And I found when I got introduced to the outdoors, my dad started introducing me to the outdoors. That's where I found peace. I understood it. And I didn't have people making fun of me, and you got to take care of yourself outside. And so I learned how to take care of myself, and everything was predictable. Weather was predictable. Everything was predictable. It was simple and easy to understand and beautiful. And the effort that I put out came back to me in many wonderful ways. And so that's how I really got attracted to the outdoor life and living outside. I never took up hunting, never interested in killing animals, but fly fishing, I became a passionate fly fisherman, which is all catch and release. So I mean, and it just sort of evolved from there. And then as I got older, of course, I went to Dartmouth. There's nothing, if it's anything else, it's an outdoor school in northern New Hampshire. And it sits on the Connecticut River, and the New England mountains are very different than the Western mountains. I mean, we're used to starting at 7,000 or 8,000 feet and climbing up 12,000 foot pass. In New Hampshire, you start at sea level and climb to 4,000 feet. And you think, well, 4,000 feet isn't a big deal, except back there, they don't believe in switchbacks. You just go straight up, So I was quickly humbled by the difficulty of climbing it, of walking and hiking in places like the Pemigewasset Wilderness. And I learned how to rock climbing in college. I did Outward Bound for a year or for a semester, and got into Outward Bound and became an assistant instructor and did some pretty cool things that way. So I learned how to climb and do a whitewater canoeing and that sort of thing. And just slowly build these skills. And it was the same thing. I just loved being outside. And I remember in school going out and climbing, an afternoon of climbing would clear my head so completely. Because when you're rock climbing, you're totally focused on what you're doing. One of those things that just really cleared my head and allowed me to come back after a couple of hours of climbing across the river and come back and be completely refreshed mentally and tired physically. And found that to be really, really useful.
The thing about outdoor adventures is that they're often solo adventures or individual adventures rather than like team sports, which are the kind of things you kind of are encouraged to do in school. So I imagine that for someone with disabilities, the individual sports might be better because you can do them on your own terms and figure out how to do things in your way rather than having to be one of a team.
That's a good observation. And I was always the last one to be picked for a team.
Yeah, me too.
But that's right. But on the other hand, there is a community. I mean, for example, if you're backpacking, and I learned this very young age, as backpacking as a group, like a bunch of young boys, and we're backpacking on the John Muir Trail. We're 9, 10, 11 years old, and we got some adults with us, but we're carrying 50, 60-pound packs. We got to find a campsite. We got to make camp. We got to cook. We got to clean up. I mean, we have to work as a group. And the same thing, whitewater is very communal. You go on a whitewater trip, and you've got at least one or two other people with you, and sometimes as many as 6 or 7 other rafts. And, you've done a lot of planning beforehand. How much food do you need, and how do you pack the food and set it all up? And then at the end of the day, you got to haul all this gear out of your rafts up the bank and into the campsite and set the camp up, set your individual camps up, set up the cooking area. Somebody's going to cook, and you got to do the cooking and the cleanup. And so it's quite communal. When you're in the raft, rowing or kayaking, depending upon what trip I was on. I don't kayak anymore, but I did a lot of kayaking, whitewater kayaking, class 4, class 5 kayak. Well, never class 5, class 4. As when I was younger, I mean, it's the same thing. You're in the water and you're by yourself, but when you get out, it becomes very communal.
Yeah. So it's like you've got that community, but you still are kind of doing your own thing within the group. So, how have your disabilities changed over the years? Did they improve through the activities that you were doing, or is it still a challenge?
No, they're still a challenge, but they've improved a lot. My eyes got corrected. I had 2400 vision. I couldn't figure out why I was failing in school in the fourth grade. Well, some nurse had the bright idea to test my eyes, and all of a sudden they realized I was practically blind. I couldn't see anything. So I got these big, thick Coke lens glasses with the black lenses, which in the late 1990s, the nerdiness was really cool. Back in the 50s, it was a real buzzkill for the girls. And I didn't have no social life growing up.
Mm.
But my eyes got corrected. When I went to law school, I got wire rim glasses, still pretty thick. But then RK surgery came in. And after I graduated from law school, I was able to get RK surgery, and that was like a miracle. Then LASIK came along. I had to have some more adjustments. So I had LASIK. And then when I got older, I had early onset of cataract, and they replaced my lenses. And my eyes are like fantastic. So that took care of that. The hearing loss isn't significant enough to make a difference. I just have to pay a little closer attention. But I'm a musician. I play jazz violin and jazz. So part of it is really ear training. And I'm going through some really intensive ear training right now to help me pay attention to pitches. And my legs, I've had a tremendous amount of therapy done on my leg and ankles by massage therapists. And there's a new technique called counter strain. And locally, we have one of the international practitioners of counter strain, which is just a miraculous therapy. And I've had a lot of raw things on my leg. So lots of stuff. So my left leg, I still have limited flexibility of my ankle, but I've had a lot more flexibility than I used to have. And I took up martial arts. I'm a secondary black belt and a Tai Chi master. So the martial arts helped me develop balance and figure out how to compensate for all these limitations. And you finally get over it. But the limitations exist. I couldn't go backpacking today. I can walk about 2 miles before, and even then I have to take Advil. I can walk about 2 miles before my legs start to give out, and I just don't have the strength like I did as a kid to be able to pull a 20-mile day or a 15-mile day with a 50-pound back. There's just no way I can do that physically today.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of limited in my ability to hike through the mountains. And of course, I don't climb anymore. At 72 years old, it'd be crazy to climb. I suppose I could do really easy stuff, class 5.5, 5.6 stuff, but I'm not motivated to do it. But over the years, I have slowly overcome all of this stuff. I have a pretty normal life as a result.
And when you were a kid and you first started becoming active and, you had these disabilities, did you see that as a challenge to overcome, or was it like, oh, this is too hard? I mean, kind of approach that with two different attitudes.
Right. I didn't look at it as a challenge to be overcome. And I didn't look at it as this is just too hard.
Okay.
It's just the way it was.
Yeah. This is life.
My parents didn't treat me, maybe to their credit, they didn't treat me any differently than any of my other 3 brothers who were all gifted athletes. They just forced me to go out and do stuff. And I was horrible at baseball.
Mm.
I got into swimming.
Mm-hmm.
I started swimming, I think, at about 12 and became a competitive swimmer and swam all through high school. Mm. And I could swim. You see, I've got big, broad shoulders. So I could swim because it's mostly upper body. And so I could play water polo and swim, and that helped a lot. Mm-hmm. And it was just a function of pain as part of my life. Mm. Doesn't everybody have pain like this?
Yeah, because your body is yours. It's your only experience. You don't know what it's like to have a different body.
I would watch other kids who were really good athletes, and I just said, I do that. And sometimes I'd be a little jealous, obviously. And sometimes the popular kids in school, also the good athletes, create a little jealousy. But now I look at my life and I've accomplished so much compared to what they've accomplished in their lives. It's funny, when you're younger, you don't have enough perception or experience to recognize. Mm-hmm. So you land on the superficial stuff. But again, the outdoor life teaches you how to be in solitude, how to be connected to yourself, how to be self-reliant, and how to appreciate beauty, and how to do things that most other people never get to experience. I mean, where I live right now in Central California, I would imagine that less than 1% of the population within 100 miles of me have been to any of our national parks.
Really?
And most of them never been over to the coast. It's amazing.
Yeah. Wow. So you've already mentioned a couple of things, but what else have you learned from all of your outdoor adventures? Because you've done a lot over the years.
Well, I've learned how to push through physically really difficult situations. Whether you're caught in a snowstorm in a high mountain pass, or I'll never forget the time we were on Mount Moosilauke in New Hampshire in the 40 below zero, blowing 40 miles an hour, and survival is questionable. Mm-hmm. And you learn how to deal with all of that. So it gives you a certain strength of mind and purpose that you can apply to other aspects of your life. And as anybody who's done the kind of stuff that I've done, you face death multiple times, fortunately, got through it, but it scares the crap out of you. And, you learn what courage is and you learn how to control your panic. And everyday life, there's stuff that can be frustrating, but very little of it is where you feel like you can't handle this. I've handled so many different situations outdoors that in urban life, well, I live obviously in a rural life, but in non-intense situations, an annoyance more than anything else. So I think it builds a certain resiliency and a certain attitude towards life. By the time you learn how to climb and do whitewater and do all this stuff and become a secondary black belt, there's very little that scares me. So I'm not risk seeking, but I'm not risk averse either. And even at 72 years old, I'm not afraid of anything, really. There's very little that would intimidate me. So having that confidence, self-confidence that develops from having lots of different experiences and adventures outside and challenges, I think is a really powerful tool.
Yeah, absolutely.
And unfortunately, today, I don't think kids have the opportunity that I had when I was a child growing up in the 50s and 60s. I just don't think that parents haven't been exposed to the outdoors, and they're in their 20s and 30s, and they're trying to make ends meet. And the idea of packing up a bunch of young boys and girls and taking them up on the mountains and teaching them how to cook over a fire, or bake bread over a wood stove, or all the different skills you got to have to live in the mountains. I just don't think they get those skills. And it's too bad, because the skills translate into, I think, successful skills later in life: leadership, self-confidence, perseverance, all of that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have kids, but it seems like parents are a lot more kind of overprotective than they were when I was a kid. Here in the UK, I live in England, we have this really great program called the Duke of Edinburgh Award that the late Duke of Edinburgh started decades ago. But basically teenagers, there's different levels of the award. There's bronze, silver, gold. But basically you go out for a weekend with a map and compass. You're not allowed to use your phone. You navigate from one place to another, camp there, and then navigate somewhere else to go home the next day. And there are adults along the way making sure you're okay. And if you do get horribly lost, you can call them. And this is England. This isn't wilderness.
Right.
But they're all on their own. It's teenagers on their own.
All by themselves, just one person? Oh, so they're doing solos.
Yeah, they're doing well, there's a group. So there's a group of teenagers, but there's no adults with them making sure they're okay.
So you've got a group that are walking together, and they've got to make decisions about where are we going, how do we get there.
Yes, it's so great. Every time I see them, like, 'cause you'll see them all through the year, but kind of mostly kind of spring, summer, autumn. And it's just, I love it so much, because it's like, I wish I had that when I was a kid.
Yeah, learning basic map and compass, learning how to navigate over land without GPS, learning how to, and then in group dynamics, learning how to manage group dynamics where you're not just messaging or on Facebook. That's fantastic. And I really think that the fact that kids don't get a lot of those opportunities today is really sad. But who am I? I mean, I don't have kids. All I can do is comment on what my life experience was and then look at what's missing today and saying, it's just too bad.
Yeah. How do you think your life would be different if you didn't have all these outdoor adventures?
I have no idea. How do you know? I mean, I don't know. What else could I have done? I don't know.
Stuck in an office somewhere, going to the gym.
I don't know. It's just so hard for me to say. With the disabilities that I had, it was the outdoor experience that really shaped me. Would I have done something different without those? I don't know. I mean, my whole life has been shaped by being outdoors, from skiing and the kayaking and whitewater, everything. It's all shaped really to find who I am as a person, and to say, what would it be like? I would be a completely different human being.
Yeah.
But I don't know who I would be. Better or worse. I just don't.
Different. So how do you think all the things that you've learned from your outdoor adventures, how do you think they've helped you with your work, not only as a lawyer, but now as a mediator and a peacemaker?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I think probably the first word that comes to mind is confidence.
Yes.
When you are a young person and you're out pushing limits and you fail, not fail so much that you get hurt, although I did get hurt a couple of times, but you fail and then you pick yourself back up and you push again and you succeed, you start getting confidence that you can do things that you didn't think you could do. And that translates into ordinary professional life. When you come across professional obstacles of one kind or another, the mindset is exactly the same. Well, this is really difficult, but I know I can persevere through it because I've persevered through just about everything else in my life. So what's different here? It's maybe more intellectual, Maybe it's more of as a mediator, for example, working in an intractable conflict, I've got a puzzle I've got to work out here. And so I've got to think it through and think about what's the intervention that's going to help. But it's really no different than climbing a rock. And maybe I get stuck. Okay, so now what do I do? Well, I've gotten stuck plenty of times on a rock.
Yeah, it teaches you problem-solving skills, doesn't it?
Got to problem solve, right? How do I get around this? And how do I work my way through it? And how do I make that, that I don't want to make because I'm out of balance?
Yeah.
It's kind of scary. So having all that experience gives me the inner confidence to be able to walk into for example, an intense conflict where people would rather shoot each other than talk and figure out what to do and not get rattled by it all.
Yeah. So you've written a number of books on peace and peacemaking.
I have.
Can you tell us about those?
Sure. My first book, I learned so much in my master's degree program that I did not learn in law school. Every lawyer should really have the ability to know what I've learned. And so I teach law. I'm a law professor, and I was teaching a course called Peacemaking for Lawyers. And there was no books that anybody had ever written. Nobody, lawyer, peacemaker, that makes no sense.
You're a fighter, not a peacemaker.
Well, yeah, exactly. And so I wrote a textbook, really my master's thesis that I turned into a textbook. And that was called Peacemaking, Practicing at the Intersection of Law and Human Conflict. And in that book, I compared how the law looks at human conflict and how the peacemaker looks at human conflict. And I showed the differences. And I said, this is why the law doesn't work in many, many conflicts, because it's not suited for these kinds of problems. In that book was the very first academic writing on the neuropsychology of peace and conflict, because I've been studying neuroscience. Then the next book was co-written by my colleague, John Bogart, Sex, Politics, and Religion of the Office. It was 20 years ahead of its time. And I don't even know if we self-published that book. I don't even know if anybody can acquire it. Maybe if people are listening, they can email me. I think I've got some copies kicked. And that book was all about diversity. Well, long before anybody was talking about diversity, we were saying we have a diverse workforce. And if you're going to be an effective leader, you need to learn how to lead this diverse workforce. And you have two choices. You can tell everybody to leave their emotions at the door, leave all their baggage at the door, come in, be bland. Or you can tell people, bring in who you are as a human being, and we're going to figure out a way for us all to work together and unleash that creativity to create a dynamic workforce where we can really solve. And so it was basically a leadership book talking about how leaders should develop and lead a diverse workforce, and what happens when they don't. What happens when you suppress sex, politics, and religion at the office. And our metaphor we use is like a water balloon. You can squeeze that water balloon, but if you keep squeezing and squeezing, you're going to have a big wet mess on your hands pretty soon. And so better to learn how to lead it rather than to manage it. That was the second book. Third book was called Elusive Peace, How Modern Diplomatic Strategies Could Better Resolve World Conflicts. And that book I wrote that book, it was published in 2013. I'd read a book called Camp David, The Untold Truth. And it was written by a guy who was witnessing the Camp David talks between Bill Clinton and Netanyahu and Abbas. And Clinton totally screwed up. He made every single rookie mistake in the book as a mediator. He was obviously grossly untrained as a mediator, and the talks fell apart at the last minute because he didn't know what to do. And I read it, and I just shook my head. And I said, how bad is this? So I started doing the research, and I found out that it's massively prevalent in international relations that people who do mediations don't know what they're doing. They're essentially professionally incompetent as mediators. They may be great diplomats, horrible peacemakers and mediators. So that's what that book was all about, talking about how International Diplomatic Corps has to use 21st century skills to solve 21st century problems rather than 17th century skills, which we're using. So that was that book. There were some interesting chapters in there. One, how do you mediate evil? Really interesting. I looked at some really high-end conflicts at that time. For example, I was looking at the 2008-2009 Kenyan election crisis. Kofi Annan, who came in, he used to be the Secretary General of the UN, was a big known guy, got a Nobel Peace Prize, came in, completely blew it, made it all worse. And even today, Kenya suffers from his failed mediation attempts back in 2008, 2009. So then my fourth book was called De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. That book came out in 2017, and it was based on a set of skills that I actually discovered and developed in 2005. And I can literally teach anybody how to calm an angry person in 90 seconds or less, again, based on neuroscience. My colleague Laurel Coffer and I had started the Prison of Peace project in 2010, where we were training lifers and long-termers in maximum security prisons how to become peacemakers to stop prison violence. And the first skill we taught them were these skills. And then our students kept asking me, they knew I was an author, and they said, would you please write a book so we could share it with our families? And I finally said yes. And the book was published by Simon & Schuster in 2017. And it's done pretty well since then. So 4 books, and I've contributed a lot of chapters to other books and articles and scholarly articles and stuff like that, all kind of academic and lay writing and all around the work of peacemaking and solving conflicts. Very divorced from my outside, being outdoors.
Yeah, but I wanted to talk about your books because I think that's a really interesting topic.
I will say that, was it De-Escalate? It was either De-Escalate or Elusive Peace. Maybe it was Peace. I wrote a huge part of that book on a river trip.
Nice.
We had 10 days on the main salmon, and we'd only be on the water for 3 or 4 hours and pull over, and I'd just start writing. I had legal pads, and I just
oh wow
had everything in a dry bag and just pull out, start writing manuscripts. I'm pretty sure that was Elusive Peace.
Nice.
Yeah, I wrote like 4 or 5 chapters that week.
Nice.
Nothing more inspiring than sitting on a river and watching the water go by.
Absolutely.
Right.
So just to touch back again on your outdoor adventures, since you've had a lifetime of them, what are some of the outstanding experiences that you've had in the outdoors that have really shaped your life?
There are just so many moments. I'll never forget the moment I was with my best friend, and we were on the Klamath River in Northern California, and we got on the water early, and the sun was coming up. We got into a place where the water, there was this huge, the river was making a turn down this big cliff, ferns and flowers, and the eddy, there's just a big eddy, and the sun was coming up over the ridge and dropping down and dappling sunlight down onto the river and onto this cliff. I mean, it was just one of the most beautiful moments that I'd ever experienced. And even today, and that was maybe 40 years ago, but you still remember this stuff. I remember incredible days of powder skiing. I remember catching my first steelhead on a fly rod. That was pretty exciting. I love fly fishing because it's an excuse to go out into the wilderness, into a beautiful place, and just waste a lot of time waving a crazy stick around. And maybe you catch a fish and maybe you don't. It really doesn't matter. I don't fish now as much as I used to. I kind of miss that. But I did a year ago, fish the upper Mackenzie in Oregon and got into some really big wild rainbow trout, which was really a lot of fun. It's 18, 19 inches, which is very unusual. But catching my first steelhead, and I remember some of the scary times. I remember climbing a chimney unroped, and the chimney started widening out, and I freaked. I totally panicked. So I made the decision to go down, and so I had to work my way 40 feet down, and sharp rocks at the bottom. If I'd fallen, I would have been dead. So that gave me nightmares for a long time. I remember being on the side of Mount Shasta in the wintertime in the middle of a raging blizzard, telling my buddy Paul, I said, we're crazy to be up here. Let's get out of here. And finally, I talked him into it in the middle of the night. We pack up in the blizzard and work our way down 2,000, 3,000 feet to where we parked a car, and said, well, that was stupid.
Yeah, that's the thing. The situations can change, the weather can change, and you've got to make different decisions than what you thought you were going to make.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, Doug, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your adventures and how you've had adventures even with your disabilities and how you've overcome challenges. Where can people find you online and learn more about what you do?
Well, my website is dougnoll.com, and I teach people how to de-escalate difficult situations. And like I said earlier, if those of you who are listening have a difficult conversation that you would like to have but are afraid of it and you've been avoiding it, then check out my Difficult Conversations project. It's totally free. I'll spend an hour with you and the other person that you have to have the conversation with, and I will help you have that difficult conversation in a very safe environment. And that's dougnoll.lp/difficult-conversations. The catch is it's going to be live streamed.
Yeah, that's the challenging bit.
No confidentiality here. None of the mediation rules apply. You have to be willing to be on essentially a reality TV show that I self-produce, and I just put it up on YouTube. But the reason is, if people can watch how I help other people have this difficult conversation, they can get the inspiration the way I can do this too. It will make for a more peaceful world when people realize that just with the application of some very sophisticated skills that anybody can learn, we can have peace. You can end fights and arguments in your family forever using these skills.
Well, I'm very curious about them. I'm going to have to check out your website again now. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us.
Okay, Holly, thanks a lot.
Please drop me a line and let me know what you thought of this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollywharton.com or find me online and get in touch there. If you enjoyed this show, you might want to check out these related episodes. 436, I talk with Tori Joy Geiger about how to have outdoor adventures when you've got a chronic illness. 385, I discuss how your adventures can revolutionize your relationship with your body. 373, I talk about how outdoor adventures can help you give yourself permission to be you. 367, I discuss finding yourself through solo travel and outdoor adventures. And finally, 293, I talk about how to get back on track and get shit done after illness or burnout. And that's not like a super outdoor adventure episode. It's from the previous archives of my podcast when I was talking about business and lifestyle stuff. So you might find that useful. So thank you so much for listening. Next week's episode will be another solo show. But in the meantime, remember to visit hollywharton.com/489 for the show notes on this episode, including links to books and guest links and all the good stuff. And that's all for now. Happy trails to you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollywharton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.